This is Akashvani. In the weekly program Current Affairs, now we bring you a discussion on the importance of fitness and fight against obesity. The participants are Dr. Naval Vikram, Professor, Department of Medicine, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, AIIMS, Dr. Balbir Singh, Senior Cardiologist, and Dr. Swapnil Oti, Assistant Professor, All India Institute of Ayurveda, Goa. Moderator is Bindu Shajan Perepadan, journalist.
Prime Minister Modi at the 38th National Games opening recently has emphasized on the need to reducing cooking oil consumption to control obesity, which increases the risk of diabetes and heart diseases. To discuss the importance of fitness and fight against obesity, we have with us three physicians, Naval Vikram, Balbir Singh and Dr. Swapnil Oti. We will start with Dr. Naval Vikram. Dr. Naval Vikram, we would like to understand what are the various schemes that is now available to the common man, which has been brought in by the Indian government to reduce obesity, and why are Indian bodies so vulnerable?
Namaskar to everyone. I'll answer the second question first. Why Indians are more vulnerable to develop obesity? That is because traditionally from the earlier times, there is a tendency to store fat in the body. Because our genes have been programmed in such a way that because of several famines and lack of nutrients, our genes have been programmed in such a manner that we have a more tendency to store, particularly in the abdomen. And now since there is abundance of food, and then this genes take a very long time, hundreds of years to change. So the genes haven't changed, but our environment has drastically changed because of abundance of food. That is another reason. Second is that Indian population, we tend to have high resistance to the action of insulin which is produced, which controls the blood sugar in the body. And that may be because of several factors, maybe some genetic factors, maybe some phenotypic factors. And because of that, we tend to develop problems at a lower weight or lower adiposity as compared to the Western population.
Right, sir.
So there we have an issue. So this is one reason why we are more prone. This coming to the first question, what are the programs what are the various modalities? One, there is a national program to control the non-communicable diseases, and as a part of that, there are several factors which are to be taken into consideration. Lifestyle is the most important in that, and then there is a Fit India movement which has been launched, encouraging everybody to be fit. And not directly related, but yes, Khelo India, Khelo is also in a way encouraging sports, encouraging activity, and that also indirectly helps in preventing obesity. So these various programs are there and they would be helpful in prevention of obesity in the Indian population.
Dr. Swapnil, I would like to bring you in here. I would want to know what our traditional form of healing, Ayurveda, talks about. What are the changes that the Indian bodies are going through? And how do you view this rise in obesity?
Basically, according to Ayurveda, the sedentary lifestyle and today's lot of stress, these are the main, other than the dietary factors. Tackle these things, not only the dietary changes, but also the fitness is very important, and stress management is also very important. For that, Panchakarma therapies, like some external therapies are also there, and internal body purification methods are also there. Like there is some powder massages, some specific type of the tea modalities. These help for patient or the person, a normal healthy individual who is slightly obese or overweight, to remain in a healthy status. And also this Panchakarma therapies, they balances the dosha, and because of which the metabolic level changes are there, and because of which the weight can be maintained effectively.
Dr. Balbir, why is obesity so detrimental to the health of a human being?
So obesity is single factor which determines so many other things in the body.
Right,
so the
sir.
metabolic syndrome, the diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, brain stroke have been associated with obesity. So we have been talking about Indians, how they get into this gambit. So Indians have a tendency to have abdominal obesity, which is totally different from the obesity of the West. So obesity in West, they decide by the body mass index, which is height and the weight taken into consideration. Indians may not be too much overweight, but they have a belly. They have a waist which is coming out. So we tend to go more by waist-hip ratio. So if I find somebody who has a very big waist-hip ratio, let's say 1.0 or more, I know that his metabolic parameters are going to be bad. We get our fat into the areas of the body which are worse and cause blood sugars to go up, cause blood pressure to go up, which is called the metabolic syndrome. And this metabolic syndrome is detrimental to the heart. So our focus on diet and exercise should be much more than what is in the West. We have this thrifty gene hypothesis, which was just mentioned, and we have a tendency to have heart disease. And I'm so glad that the Prime Minister himself came to this point, because we have been talking on this for many years. Now that Prime Minister has put in, it will go to the general public, and I'm sure some reforms will happen.
आंकड़े कहते हैं कि हमारे देश में ओबेसिटी की समस्या तेजी से बढ़ रही है। देश का हर एज ग्रुप और युवा भी इससे बुरी तरह से प्रभावित हो रहे हैं, और ये चिंता की बात इसलिए भी है, मोटापे की वजह से डायबिटीज, हार्ट डिजीज जैसी बीमारियों का रिस्क बढ़ रहा है। मुझे संतोष है कि आज देश फिट इंडिया मूवमेंट के माध्यम से फिटनेस और हेल्दी लाइफस्टाइल के लिए जागरूक हो रहा है। दो चीजों पर जरूर फोकस करें, थोड़ा सा समय निकालकर एक्सरसाइज जरूर करिए। दूसरा ये कि अपनी डाइट पर फोकस कीजिए, बैलेंस इनटेक पर आपका फोकस हो और खाना न्यूट्रिशियस हो। अपने खाने में अनहेल्दी फैट, तेल को थोड़ा कम करें।
Dr. Naval Kushore, again, I would like to bring you back to your own research and the group that has got together and now come out with new guidelines for obesity. This has happened, these revised guidelines are now coming out after 15 years. So, Dr. Vikram, could you please discuss what these new guidelines are, the hallmarks, the specific hallmarks of these new guidelines, and what it means for the general public?
Yeah, so the need for revising the guidelines for obesity was felt worldwide, and the Lancet has also had an international commission where the experts were from all over the world, and then those guidelines also have been revised, and we have revised the Indian guidelines. The need for revising the guidelines was that initially the main focus was only on body mass index. As mentioned earlier, it just takes weight and height into consideration. But there is a big problem with body mass index. It does not differentiate between muscle, fat, bone. For example, if there is an athlete, let's say a weightlifter or a wrestler, who has a percentage body fat would be very low, but his or her body mass index will be somewhere around 30, 32. So that person will also be categorized as obese, and also another person who has high body fat, very less muscle, and still the BMI is 32. So that person also will be categorized in the same. So the BMI does not differentiate between the amount of muscle one has or the amount of fat one has. So that is why there was a need to revise the guidelines. So in that, one measure of fat may be added. The second thing is that the BMI cutoff of 23 has been taken, which is in contrast to that by international standards, 25 is the overweight cutoff, whereas in Indians it is 23. The reason for that is that over a period of few decades, various studies in the Indian population have been done and which have shown that Indians tend, what a Caucasian or an American would develop a problem at a BMI of 27. Indian person will develop the problems at 23 BMI. So we tend to develop problems at a lower degree of BMI and lower adiposity. Right. And that is why one has to start looking out or taking precautions early on. So the threshold is, that is why the threshold has been brought down. That is number one. Second is that, as we said, that we tend to accumulate fat over the belly. So a BMI again does not clearly indicate the belly fat. So there has to be a measure of fat in the belly, that is like waist circumference or waist to hip ratio. And another simple measure is just waist to height ratio, that you measure your waist, you measure your height, and you waist divided by the height, whatever value comes. If it is more than 0.5, that means if your waist is more than half of your height, then that means there is a problem. You are accumulating fat in your belly.
So this is true for any age group, or is there a specific age group that you're talking about?
That is the best part of it, that this ratio, waist to height ratio, can be applicable to any age group, across the gender and across the age. So this is something which has been seen in children, adolescents, older people, young adults, everywhere. And this is one measure, which is a simple measure. Maybe it can be a public health measure also. You keep your waist half of your height. I mean, that goes a long way in managing, preventing and managing the abdominal obesity, the bad fat accumulation in that position. So these are the few things. That is why these guidelines have been brought, and the guidelines also say that there are two stages mainly. One, you have obesity as per the BMI, but you don't have any other obesity related problem.
Right.
So that is the innocuous obesity. And the second stage is when you have already developed obesity related problem, let's say high blood pressure, high blood glucose, lipids, or obstructive sleep apnea or whatever. So if there is no problem, you're in stage 1, you have to stay there. You have to take precautions, or the advised lifestyle measures have to be taken so that you don't go on to stage 2. So that is where prevention strategies can be very helpful to avoid going to stage 2. And once you go to the stage 2, then of course you have to manage the associated problems so that you don't develop into the complications of those metabolic syndrome problems. So you don't develop complications related to that.
Right.
This management strategies has made clear, and that I think this can be practiced even at a grassroots level, even at a primary care physician can categorize this way and simply will help in managing obesity at every level.
Right.
And that is why these new guidelines have been formulated.
Dr. Balbir, I'd like to ask you, do Indians who live abroad, are they also in the same boat as us, or are they a different population? Should we treat them differently in terms of obesity management?
In a different environment, when an Indian goes with the same gene pool, what happens to him? So they are extremely high risk for a heart disease. So they have much more metabolic syndrome than a Caucasian. So what is the metabolic syndrome? Metabolic syndrome means sugars are high, triglycerides are high, HDL, which is a good cholesterol, is low, and they have blood pressure. And then they have a belly which is bigger. So this, you can see, is a common thing in India, to have a bigger belly. A bigger belly means high chance of a metabolic syndrome. So we have something in our gene pool which pushes us into this. The second thing that could be responsible is that our dietary habits of very high carbohydrate, very fried food, which if you see the continental food, it has less carbohydrates, less oils. Our food is high carbohydrates, high oils, and less exercise. So is that responsible for our detrimental effects of metabolic syndrome? So I think it is a combination of both the genes and the environment of having high carbohydrate, high fatty, oily meals with lack of exercise, which is a deadly triad. So we have a gene, we have poor diet control, and then we lack of physical exercise. So all these three triad makes us at very high risk for heart disease. So it is true that Indians staying abroad have equally high risk as we in India, or maybe a little higher.
Dr. Swapnil, I'd like to ask you, what is the traditional form of eating right which is advocated by Ayurveda?
Basically, our traditional diets, they are perfectly all right, but nowadays we are slightly shifted from our origins, and because of this there are some problems which are created. For example, the good dietary combinations. I would like to give one example. In Kerala, generally rice is the main diet, and as we know, rice is one of the rich carbohydrate source which can increase the weight. Whenever they consume the rice, it is mainly with buttermilk or something which is sour in nature. Okay, so this is the combination that keeps the glucose level absorption to a very low extent. So these are some of the combinations, or simply our spices, like traditional spices which we use in our cooking. They are the best source which can control the metabolic level of this obesity derangements, whatever happening in the body. So using less cooking oil and adding good spices in the diet, that is the best way to control the weight in a longer term. If you see, simply the turmeric is one of the main dietary constituent of Indian diet, which is the best drug considered as per Ayurveda in management of diabetes, also in obesity also. So this thing, curd and takra, what we call is a buttermilk and curd, they both are from the same sources but have the different properties. Ayurveda advocates that curd is not good for obesity, but this thing, buttermilk, is very good for obesity, and it is the medicine for obesity basically.
Right.
So the food combination and food sanskar, we call it as, that is the what we call it, we make the changes in the food. These are good for the dietary absorption and management of carbohydrate absorption overall.
So going back to our traditional form of eating.
Basically, according to Ayurveda, the time of eating, the quantity of eating, and the food combination, these are the main factors you should understand, because Ayurveda tells that if your diet is heavy in nature, suppose we cannot stop a person if he is going in somewhere in parties and he is eating something that is very heavy to digest, then Ayurveda tells that you eat half whatever is your need. Means suppose you have the appetite for 4 chapati, you have to consume only 2 chapatis. This is for the heavy diet, if you are eating it with some heavy thing like paneer and anything like that. Okay, but if you are having some light diet, then you can use use 3/4 of your abdominal part or your appetite part, and remaining 25% can be used for air and water. So this is the common thing that is Ayurveda is telling, as we cannot judge this exactly. The only thing is that whenever you eat, you should not feel sleepy after eating. So that is the common guideline a common man can follow. And simply the time of eating. You should eat only when you have the appetite.
Okay.
Simply because of it is a dinner time or it is a lunch time, you should not consume the diet. And Ayurveda advocates for the intermittent fasting also, because fasting is very helpful in managing the metabolic as well as the some sort of the endocrine diseases also.
Right. Dr. Swapnil, intermittent fasting is something which is taken, everyone seems to be keen on doing it or following it. Is there a particular time or is there a way of doing intermittent fasting? Who decides the time between two meals? Or how is the time between?
There is nothing specific guideline. It is as per your appetite. Okay. Because see, suppose a person is having the habit of eating a very heavy diet, then for him, merely the dietary changes. Suppose I am eating daily something very heavy, like suppose example, butter chicken I am using daily. Okay, so shifting on dal and rice is itself is a light diet for me. And that can be considered into a fasting phenomena. Other than if I am habitual to the light diet, and for me then being on fruit diet or fruit juices or simply on water for whole day, that can be considered as a fasting.
Right.
So it is as per your appetite basically, and that gives a rest to your organs, like suppose pancreas and all these dietary associated organs of the digestive system. It gives a rest to them. They function well in longer term. The free radical attack which is happening on those organs as per aging or as per the lifestyle, that is actually stopped.
Okay, sir. Dr. Naval, coming back to you, I would want to know what is the ground reality that India is facing in terms of obesity now. Where do we stand? Are we in a good zone? Are we in a bad zone? Are we heading to a very bad zone?
See, in terms of obesity, if we see the national surveys give us a picture. National Family Health Survey 4 and National Family Health Survey 5. So these are the two one was done in 14-15, the next one was done in 2019 to 2021, I think. This was a family health survey done all over the country from representative populations, and what we see here that there was a 25% increase in men and women with obesity.
Right.
There was a 25% increase in these two surveys. And if we see the earlier surveys, that there was definitely going on increasing. So on an average, the prevalence of obesity, it was about 20 to 25% if we take an average of the whole country.
But world over, we are seeing obesity rise. Is India very far off the index, or are we in tune with the world?
We are going in tune with the world in terms of increase in the prevalence. Like if we see the prevalence in countries as such, some in countries the prevalence may be high. But if we see that in those countries, some European countries, the prevalence is high, but the absolute numbers are low. So even if they have a prevalence of 30%, that would amount to much less number of individuals with obesity as compared to our India, where even if we say we are 15% having obesity,
the total number is very high.
That you can just imagine that will amount to how much is the actual number. So it is increasing, and this obesity is an average of about 25%, 20 to 25%. But if we see in some major cities, let's say in Delhi, Chandigarh, in some cities of Punjab, some cities down the south, like some surveys which have been done from other cities, Chennai and other various cities, they're at more than 50-55% of the population come in the category of obesity. So it varies. In the metropolitan city, it's much more. It's less and catching up in the rural cities, and somewhere in between in the tier 2 or 3 cities, that is in between this. So traditionally, rural population was said to be fit and hardworking, very less prevalence of obesity. But now, more and more, the factors are, dietary habits are changing all over the place. Even in the rural areas, the dietary habits are changing. They are getting a culture to the urban lifestyle, the traditional rural lifestyle of hard work and simple food. Those things are changing, and hard work now, more and more mechanization is happening. So the traditional hard work is also reducing. In the urban cities also, there is a lot of mechanization is there, increase in the transport is there, public transport, personal transport. So basically sedentary behavior is increasing, and in kids also, it's more and more screen time. They have to do this work, that project, this thing, so they're spending much more time in front of the screens, maybe at the computer screens, maybe the phone screen. So sedentariness is increasing, and this has happened particularly after the pandemic. because during pandemic everybody was
indoors,
work from home and all those things which were a necessity at that time, but now they're not. Those habits have still continued, and that is maybe one reason that sedentariness is high, physical activity is less, and that is why we see increase in the obesity across the socio-economic groups, across the ages, and on a background of we haven't defeated malnutrition completely as
absolutely. So we are facing two-edged sword. We have obesity and then we have malnutrition.
Yeah, malnutrition has not been completely
finished.
Can
you be obese and malnourished?
See, malnourishment is a broad term.
Right.
Which malnourishment means your status of your nourishment status is bad. It can be bad that you are undernourished. It can be bad that you are overnourished. Malnourishment, I would say, undernutrition.
Correct.
Let's say we haven't defeated undernutrition or eradicated undernutrition completely from our country. And on top of that, we are now having increasing prevalence of obesity, and this is also affecting the lower and middle socioeconomic class and the productive age group.
Correct.
You can imagine if this large population is exposed to obesity, which is the mother of several non-communicable diseases, as Dr. Balbir said, that cardiac disease, diabetes, several other things. So you can imagine over a period of years, if this is not checked, then what will happen to the population? The burden of disease would be so high on the individuals, and that is going to overwhelm the healthcare system of India with the sheer numbers.
Dr. Balbir, I'd like to bring you in. Could you tell us how obesity is affecting women and children? And are we getting obese earlier, sooner than what we used to say 10 years back?
So I see a big shift in this change in obesity going up, particularly the childhood obesity. So first thing is that children now are less active than what we were when we were children.
Right.
They sit more on computers, they sit more on video games than on the playgrounds. Very clear change. It's happened and it's happening. It's getting worse. And they have free access to foods. So they have the pizzas and the order from home with multiple delivery systems happening. So access to food has become such a simple thing. So childhood obesity carries on as adulthood obesity. Now we come to the woman. So women, the heart disease incidence is gone up tremendously. And one major reason has been obesity. And if you look at a post-menopausal woman, their waist-hip ratios are worse than anybody else. So it's really time to concentrate on children and women before we go on to the men, talk about men. So there is more awareness among men than children and women. And this has to be brought out, this topic has to be brought out in schools where a childhood obesity, the children should be checked for obesity, the parents should be guided as to what should be done. So this is a big area for intervention in India, because we don't want a population to be struggling after 15, 20 years and getting young heart attacks that we are getting at the present moment in time. And we know the direct link between obesity and heart disease and brain stroke also. Okay. That we have to, there is no way just sitting over it and thinking that India is progressing. So we have to progress. We are doing a great job in economy, but we cannot let our health go down and make youngsters suffer in this game.
So what is the way forward? The doctors in their new guidelines had suggested that you start early. Start your diet early, start your exercise early. So how early is early? And what is the way forward? How does a woman, how does a child, how does a man tackle this problem?
Starting early means starting from school. So if you see children in school, they are at least 3 times higher obesity than it was 2 decades back. So this is clear change which you see, which is happening. I remember in my school days, if there was once one child who was obese, he was made fun of because the rest were fine. But now 50% are obese, so nobody questions it. And this question has to be raised by the school teachers by having classes, teach them how to avoid obesity and what are the ill effects of later on having obesity. It has to start in the school. It has to start from homes. There has to be constant exercises. We have such a nice tool of yoga in our country. And yoga is a great tool to counter many of these things, to give you a mind peace. Yoga is a complete thing. It has a diet, it has a mind peace, it has exercise. It is not just moving your arms. It has so many things. So this is a yogic experience. So they have to be taught about these traditions of yoga and other things. This will take us a long way. If we don't concentrate on this, we are going to be in problem.
Dr. Swapnil, if I can bring you in, is there a way to control obesity early on in life? Would you advocate yoga? Is controlling food a way to bring this in?
Yes, definitely. As doctor said, we should make yoga not as a habit. It should be the part of your life.
Sir, we have the economic survey which was tabled today, and there was economic survey brought about a very important aspect about mental health. Because obesity, like you said, is the mother of so many diseases. I would like to know, is there a connection between obesity and mental health? And how do you as a physician view this? And what does it mean for the general public?
Absolutely, there is a connection between obesity and mental health, and definitely because obesity is associated with mental problems or psychiatric disorders. So what we have seen that individuals who otherwise look fine, and once we put them through scales, different kind of scales, questionnaires, then we identify that the individuals are not aware, but about 20% of them are having hidden psychiatric disorders. They don't have anything else, just obesity. So they have obesity itself is one. Obesity may be associated with stigma from others. That is number one. Obesity is generally associated with sedentary habits. And sedentary habits means one is dependent upon most of the time one is in front of the screen. No less exercise. All these things add to the stress.
Add to a deterioration of your
deterioration
mental health.
Deterioration of mental health. If you need a rest, if you keep on sleeping the whole time, then obviously your body will going into stress because you need certain hours of sleep. More than that is not required.
Right.
Active physical activity is required. In fact, physical activity is one thing which alleviates your mood. And if that is not there in life, that definitely increases the chances of having mental ill health.
Right.
So obesity and mental ill health definitely go together. And in addition to diet, in addition to physical activity or exercise, in addition to medications, behavioral therapy plays a very important role in management of obesity. Individual who is having obesity, a behavioral therapy in terms of change in the lifestyle, a change in the thinking, a change in the way one looks at food, way the person looks at exercise, the way the person feels like the person is motivated, feels like changing himself or herself, all that is done by the behavioral therapy. So once the behavior changes, then only the other changes are visible.
Okay.
So behavioral therapy it has a very important role in managing the obesity.
Okay. So another related question that I wanted to ask is, when you're managing obesity, what is the ratio of exercise versus diet? How important is diet? How important is exercise? Is it 90% your diet, 10% your exercise, or is it the other way around?
I would say the most important is diet.
Right.
Because dietary changes you can take. You can't exercise forever.
True.
That is not true. Your muscles will get fatigued. You may get injury. So appropriate amount of exercise, say about 60 minutes in a day. And diet is the most important. You can't lose calories too many by exercise, but you can avoid taking in calories. That most important is the diet. Whatever diet, you may daily decrease the calories. You may do time restricted fasting. That is intermittent fasting. Whatever suits you, and exercise. And in exercise also, you have to combine both. Only just running on a treadmill or running around. Aerobic exercise, the so-called aerobic exercises, they're very important. They increase the cardiovascular, cardiorespiratory fitness. Very nice. But you should add resistance exercise or muscle strengthening also.
So what is resistance exercise? How would you explain
Resistance is that aerobic exercise, you exercise your heart and your respiratory system much more. That does not give too much exercise, too much activation to the muscles. That's why it is important that muscle is the largest organ, one of the largest organ, and that consumes the glucose.
Right.
And that consumes a lot of energy. Once you activate your muscles, they become activated and they consume a lot of nutrients. So that prevents accumulation of sugar, that prevents accumulation of fat and everything. So resistance exercise is that you activate these muscles, maybe using a resistant band. You can use free weights as under supervision.
Correct.
And you can use your own body weight as this thing. So that like doing push-ups against the wall, against the floor. They are called calisthenics. So these you can use your own body weight as a resistance, or you can use an elastic band or an elastic loop or free weights, dumbbells, other things. So at least out of 60 minutes daily, if you add around 20 minutes of resistance exercise,
we are on a good plane.
You will be on a good plane, and your heart will be good, your respiratory system will be good, and your muscles will be good. So if these three you keep well,
you should be doing well. And then control your carbohydrate.
Yes, then control your diet.
To all the three physicians, thank you for the very enriching conversation that we just had. So the basic takeaway from this is keep your waist half of your height, eat only when you're hungry, and keep your stomach half empty. Thank you for the discussion.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on the importance of fitness and fight against obesity. The participants were Dr. Naval Vikram, Professor, Department of Medicine, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, AIMS, Dr. Balbir Singh, Senior Cardiologist, and Dr. Swapniloti, Assistant Professor, All India Institute of Ayurveda, Goa. Moderator was Bindu Shajan Perepadan, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani.